Thank you all for coming and attending, particularly for those of us on the Eastern time zones, for which it's a bit late, 9 p.m. for Duan Ran there in Nanjing. But that's about the only time we can do it because already Wesley got up early for an 8 a.m. start. So I just want to say a few words, and I'll only say a few because I want to leave the bulk of the time for the people who really have something to say here. But I need to give a little background as to what WAITRO is for those who don't know. It'll be very quick because I think most of you do know. And then a little background to these SDG Impact Awards, SDG being, of course, Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations and the way we're doing it in 2024 and why we're all here. So for those not familiar with WAITRO, or as it's known, the Global Innovation Family, WAITRO stands for the World Association of Industrial and Technological Research Organizations. It's an independent nonprofit, and it's existed since 1970. We will be 54 years old in October. It was founded out of UNIDO, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, and it's been continuously operating ever since. We now have more than 170 members and partners in over 70 countries around the globe. And most importantly, when I say member of WAITRO, it has a very distinct meaning, which is unusual for most associations. Our members are not individuals, and they're certainly not countries. Our members are organizations, research and technology organizations typically, or RTOs. And many universities qualify as RTOs in that they function in a research capacity. This gives us a unique strength because our organization members give us very strong local and regional engagement around the world. And although we know that the problems of sustainability that we face in the future have really no respect for national borders, we know well what those problems are. Things like changing climate, things like global pandemics, things like aging societies. They cross national borders with ease. But the solutions to these problems tend to be developed in response to local problems at the local level. So the local and regional engagement of our WAITRO members connected to our global network gives WAITRO a lot of strength for engaging and advancing the Sustainable Development Goals. And this was actually brought out in last year's Global Sustainable Development Report there, the GSDR. You can find that on the United Nations website. And it brought out, first of all, a little bit of a depressing preamble because they pointed out that at the halfway point of the Sustainable Development Goals, we're making no progress on many of them and actually going backwards on some of them, mostly because of the 2 or 3 years of the pandemic that had severe repercussions for sustainability, of course. But on the bright side, they really emphasize the importance of what they call socially robust science, which they define as science with societal buy-in at the local or the regional level. And I think WAITRO is in a unique position to profit and play to that. So WAITRO has a very simple mission statement, and I tend to simplify it even more by just picking out 2 words: to foster innovation by empowering our member organizations and facilitating collaboration across borders and boundaries. That's borders of countries, also borders of scientific disciplines. And the hardest of all to bridge, I find, is borders of cultures. WAITRO can serve as a neutral forum for cultures to come together and achieve understanding and figure out how to work together to solve these major problems for the next 50 years. And the facilitating, of course, is the way that we function as a network, which is what we're doing here. Now, the impact that WAITRO delivers, we'll talk a lot about impact today, is really exemplified by the WAITRO Summit that's held every 2 years. The last one was in Cape Town in South Africa in November 2022. The next one's coming up. I'll mention that on the next slide. We had 170 people together over 2 days, and you can see from the pictures we had a lot of fun, but also down the bottom did a lot of work on panel discussions and the like. And in particular, highlighted there in yellow, we introduced the SDG Impact Poster Competition. We said, okay, WAITRO members, bring us a poster presentation of your most impactful sustainable development project that you think you've done recently, and let's put them up for a competition. And we did this, and there's the posters. There was more than that. We actually had over 50 of them, and we had people too. Look, people came to look at these things. And it was really introduced as a means to drive engagement. We actually had the audience select the finalists. So out of those 50 or 60 posters that we had up, the audience selected the top 10 by actually physically going into the room and putting stickers on their favorite posters And that was a great way, it turned out, to get people talking to one another. And then we had a team of experts actually select the winners. And this is one of the winners. I think we've probably got a representative from Kibabi on the call. They had a poster on dealing with sugarcane waste in Kenya. And they were one of the two winners of last year's award because they had a proposal where the excess sugarcane waste is currently just piled up in great big piles that, first of all, produce methane, which, of course, is 30 times worse for global warming than CO2. And secondly, produce acidic runoff, which contaminates water supplies. So they had a proposal to turn that into clean fuel for cooking stoves, in contrast to the charcoal that's used in a lot of stoves in sub-Saharan Africa now. Much better for health and actually carbon neutral, given that the carbon in there is all coming from grown sugarcane. And in fact, that led to a cooperation between Kibabi and the University of Huddersfield, and they actually more recently this year got UK funding to develop that project further. They're looking now at $250,000 of funding from the UK. So that was a great success, and everybody enjoyed the SDG impact posters and the process and selecting the winners. But there's always a but. There's always something you can do better. And one of the comments from the judging panel really stuck with me, is that very few of these posters show projects that are investor ready. And when you think about it, it's not the least bit surprising because most of our members of WAITRO, research technology organizations, they tend to work on early stage research projects. They don't tend to think down the line to how can I bring in impact investors and really scale this and use it to create real impact around the world. And that's a problem because all of our members in WAITRO are always looking for what I've come to call the F word. It's always the word that crops up whenever we put out surveys. What are you interested in? The number one thing that everybody's interested in is the F word. It's funding. They all want to find funding. And there's relatively little funding. And I hope Jean-Marc is going to put up one of the slides that I really love of his, showing where the funding really is. And it's not where we're mostly looking, which is in government research programs and international development programs. It's mostly in the private sector. To access that funding, you need to take projects further to a further stage of development that interests those sorts of investors. And so that, in a nutshell, is the whole thesis behind this year's WAITRO Global Summit 2024, which is going to be in Nanjing, China, November 13th to 15th. The detailed link there you can get by scanning the QR code, or you can find it on the WAITRO website or LinkedIn or about a dozen different places right now. But the overall goal of the summit this year is from innovation to impact and strategies for sustainable solutions. And we already have impressive clutch of plenary presentations, more than this actually, and breakout sessions, which you can all find details about on the website. But I promised I wasn't going to talk too much. So I'll just talk about this one, the SDG Impact Poster Competition, where we're doing something a little bit different. We really want to focus this year on this question: what's missing? How to develop investor-ready, sustainable development goal projects. And we have three immensely qualified presenters here to start you off. This is the first stage of the process, the webinar, to explain to you what these three investors, scientists, technologists see is missing from typical RTO projects. After this webinar, we're going to have a call for posters again for the poster competition for 2024, and we will invite researchers from members and non-members alike. Actually, we're going to open this up to anybody that wants to submit posters. We will give you a template later. We don't have it right now to showcase your research results. But this time I want an emphasis, not just on the SDG impact, but on the roadmap to investor readiness. And as I've said several times in the work up to this, I don't expect to get 55 investor-ready posters in November because it's just too short a time. But we will be looking for the roadmap there to understand how to get to an investor-ready situation. The key metric that we judge these posters on is going to be their appeal to investors. The posters will be displayed at the WAITRO Summit in Nanjing. We will print them for you. If they pass an initial screening, we will display them in the exhibition at the summit. And the top 10, which will be selected again by the audience, will get to physically pitch their projects in a 3-minute Shark Tank-like plenary session, so in front of the whole conference. And we're going to have live feedback and criticism on the pitch from the judging panel. and then the panel will vote on the winner. And we expect to have a small cash reward for the winner, but the real prize for the winner is not going to be the cash. It's going to be working with one of our WAITRO affiliated incubators to now realize that roadmap that you put together in the poster, and actually take advantage of the support to really get your project to the next stage of impact. So that's what we're doing here. The first question I always get is, can you pay me to come to the meeting? And most of the time I can't, because we don't have much budget. But for people that ask this question, this year we've set up a sponsorship scheme for the summit. This is deliberately small because I don't want to publicize it to everybody, but if you can locally or regionally recruit people that are willing to fund maybe 10, 15, 20 people from your region to attend the WAITRO Summit. We don't want the money to run the summit, but we want the money to help people from the various regions actually attend. Then in return, we can offer the sponsor exposure on the WAITRO website and invited presentation slots, and even the co-sponsorship of the whole SDG Impact Award. So if you see sponsorship opportunities in your region, please get in contact and we'll send you the sponsorship proposal. And there's one example, as you can see from our current header. We already have 3 co-sponsors for the conference, and I hope we will eventually generate many more before we get to November. So that's all I wanted to say. I'll just leave you with our online channels where you can find more information about WAITRO, particularly on the LinkedIn site, where we will be updating the summit as we fill in the details in the next few weeks. But that is all I was going to say. So Ran, are there any completely urgent questions that popped up that people need to ask? I have to figure out how to unshare.
There should be a red. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, there should be, but unfortunately my presentation was sitting right in front of it, and that makes it kind of difficult to see. There you go. I did it. We're back to the display, right? So shall we move on and have our keynote presenters, and then we'll open it up for questions afterwards, right?
Yes, right now.
So then it's my great pleasure to introduce someone who's become a good friend of WAITRO over the last 4 or 5 years. Jean-Marc Champagne is the managing director of Seneca Impact Advisors out of Hong Kong, and he leads all aspects of Seneca's work. Before founding Seneca, which is just a couple of years old, he dedicated 7 years to the Worldwide Fund for Nature, or the World Wildlife Fund as it's ultimately known, the WWF. And there he worked as the head of bankable nature solutions for the Asia Pacific region. And there he nurtured and expanded scalable bankable projects. That was projects that have positive environmental and social impact, but also have a return to their investors. His earlier career has spanned 17 years in the financial industry, where he advised institutional investors on equities and equity derivatives. And Jean-Marc's commitment to sustainable finance and environmental impact underscores his influential role in shaping positive change. And we're very happy and very privileged to have him here to kick off the SDG Impact poster webinar. So I'll hand over to you, Jean-Marc. Please, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Thanks for the nice introduction. And it's great to be here again with the WAITRO team. It's always been really exciting stuff to see all these interesting technologies and ideas come out from a lot of pretty inspiring people. So what we're going to try to do, as Paul mentioned in this webinar, is to see how we can move them along from, I guess you can say, from concepts into actual reality, which would involve making them into businesses or something that has a commercial value. So with that, I'm going to frame this, and then our other speakers, Wes and James, will be drilling down a bit further. But what I'm going to do is frame this into why and the reason behind why we want to do this. So let me just share my deck here. If I can find it among the many windows I have opened. There we go. Okay. Okay, so presentation mode, I hope. Okay, so everyone can see my screen? Is it thumbs up?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, great. Good. Okay, so what we're investing for purpose. This is what impact investing is. For those who aren't familiar with impact investing, the difference between, you may have heard things like ESG investing, impact investing. The big difference with impact investing compared to others is that you're actually investing with intent or with purpose. So the idea is that you're trying to, get your money to work for something positive, whether it be for the environment or for social aspects. Now, let's just start here and take a look at this this chart here. So why, and I'm going to focus more on the environmental side than the social side, but social is also a big aspect of this, and they've kind of actually converged into two when it comes to impact investing. But environmental risks, if every year the World Economic Forum does a global risk perception survey, and if you look at what these the leaders around the world see as the top risks, the top 10 risks, you can see there's 5 of the 10 are directly related to in the environment. And then you also have 2 others, 7 and 9, which are more on the societal side, which are indirectly related to the environment. You have involuntary migration, which can be due to a lot of environmental pressures, obviously geopolitical as well, but a lot of them are tended to be around environmental issues. And also societal polarization could be as a risk from food security, water scarcity. So there's a lot of reasons why that would fall into that bucket as well. So if you can see, there's quite, it's quite a, there's 7 of the 10 that are related to the environmental risks. So clearly this is an issue that there, is seen as something that has to be solved. And there's a lot of potential capital willing to go behind this, because at the end of the day, it's being seen as an existential risk to businesses, to governments. So things need to be done about this. So the money is there, to put it bluntly. But what we need to do is look at it this way, though. So the money's there, but currently you need about 4.2 trillion US dollars to go into this type of work, whether, looking at the broad scale from environmental to social for everything. We're using the Sustainable Development Goals as a measure of this and how to quantify it. Currently, there's about 1.7 trillion that goes into this. So every year there's about a $2.5 trillion Sustainable Development Goal financing gap. So how are we going to make up that difference? So you have the money that is out there, but it's not going to what we need it to go to. So if you think about the next slide, which I'm going to show here, which I think is the one that Paul quite likes, and it does kind of captivate or capture, I should say, or capture what we're trying to say here. So the part that we're talking about, the 1.7 trillion, is the yellow and the orange stuff at the very bottom right-hand corner. And if you compare it to the global capital markets, which is, say, for example, global sector debt, which is corporate bonds essentially, or global listed equities, which is the stock markets all around the world. You're talking 185 trillion of global private sector debt, 90 trillion of equity. And then you also have public debt, which is government debts, whether it's on the national level or municipal level. So you're huge sums of money that you're talking about that's out there. And the part that we're talking about in philanthropic aid and global development assistance is only 1.7 trillion. So clearly there's capital to be tapped into. And how do we do that, though? So you can't, this is what we're really going to get into. So you can't, tap into that if your projects and things that you're working on are purely grant driven, right? You need to make them into commercially viable projects. If you look here, though, just an interesting point to add in terms of annual financing flows. Currently, there's a lot, there's a lot of financing that goes into areas that have direct negative impacts on nature and climate. So it's interesting to see that from this standpoint as well. If you drill down a little bit further, a lot of funding that currently is out there is going towards negative type of investments. But then if you look at the positive side, yes, there is positive investments that's happening. If you purely look at the climate side mainly, it's quite small in comparison, right? So the 1.7 trillion that I talked about earlier is everything involved, whether it's environmental, social. But if this area you look at here, is purely on the environmental side, there's only 200 billion US dollars that goes into this. And there's a difference between public and private, of course. But clearly there's, a lot more money to be had if you look on the bigger scale of things. There's a lot more capital out there to capture. So the annual amount of private financing that's needed just purely to meet long-term climate targets, if you look at that, right, you can see from this chart that, there's a long way to go for that. So private financing has the potential to increase by 7 times and grow its share from 18 to 33% by 2050, right? So if you look at that as a measurement of GDP, it can go a lot higher in terms of where we need to go in terms of getting climate financing or capital for climate related issues. So I'm showing these as examples that you can carve out different aspects of environmental and social issues, but this is just to show you that we have a long way to go and there's a lot more potential to capture from the private market. The current private financing landscape, this just shows you how, we're looking at, from financing that is by funding channels. If you say biodiversity, look at sustainable supply chains, impact investing, payment for ecosystem services, all these type of areas is what it looks like right now. Now, these all have a potential to increase. And if you add in things like the blended finance opportunities, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but blended finance is essentially using grants plus investment to get your work, to get it to be investment ready and where it needs to be. So what are we talking about here, though, in general? So I know I threw a lot of stuff out there at you, and if you're really coming from the science and research world, maybe this might not all make initial sense. But what we want to do is get projects that you're initially looking at, which are typically from a grant basis. And the idea is, okay, here's our project. We need to get funding for this to show that it's proven the technology works. But you also need to prove that it's bankable or commercially viable. So what do we mean by bankable? So bankable is the same thing, similar to meaning as investable, right? Typically, banks and investors, they can finance a project by providing loan, which we typically refer to as bankable, or an equity investment, which is investable. So a bankable project is typically connected to a business. So when you look at your businesses or your projects that you're putting forward, can they be actual businesses and be commercially viable? Right? Can they actually have a value that someone would then lend to that particular project or invest in that particular business? These bankable projects or these type of things that we're talking about, they can be new or an improvement on an existing business that you're looking at. It doesn't all have to be from a brand new type concept, right? So you can look at something that's been existing. But the key thing to know that is that what you're developing, the projects that you're coming up with, because they're going to be commercially viable, they're going to be selling, it's typically a product that you're going to be selling with your business. So it needs to address market dynamics as it will face competition from any other business that are involved, just like any type of a business that you set up. So what are these projects and what are, the criteria for bankable projects? Well, how do we define these? So they have to have social, positive environmental and social impact. That's for one, or else we're just talking about a business. But if it doesn't, if it doesn't have the commercial value or generate predictable revenues, then it'll just be a grant-led project, right? So you have to have the two to make it into what we developed a name called bankable nature solutions or bankable projects, right? You have to have the both of them, right? So without one, it would be just a business. Without the other, it would be just a grant-led project. So typically, though, these in bankable projects, they're financed by capital that's looking for a return on investment, right? But the other big thing to keep in mind is it just doesn't have to have positive impact or commercial value. They also have to have the ability to scale or replicate. Because when investors look at projects and they look at businesses, they want to know that they can actually put a lot more investment behind this, right? So they have to have the ability to really scale up and become big projects, or else it's not really worth their time to put a lot of emphasis into and due diligence into evaluating projects and businesses if they can't really be scaled. Because at the end of the day, if they spend, if they invest, $500,000 US or they invest $100 million US, a lot of the same amount of work has to go into the due diligence and understanding if this is going to work or not. So they would rather a lot of times invest a lot more larger scale ideas. Now, that doesn't mean initially your project has to be that big. What it means is that it has to have that vision and ambition to become a much bigger item as opposed to when it initially kicks off. The idea behind this is we use, and this is what I mentioned earlier, to do this is typically what's called blended finance, which is in the early stages, when you're doing your projects and you're developing them, you get seed funding in the form of grants, and which can come from private donors. They can come from corporate donors as well, who have an interest in your particular technology. And they can also come from development agencies or development capital from around the world. The idea behind this is that they're grants, but the idea that the grants are more like technical assistance. They can help with feasibility studies. They basically help get your project to the point where it's investment ready, right? The idea is, and it typically takes several years to get it to this point, but the idea is that you get this whole project that you're working on to be commercially viable. You have offtake agreements in place where you have customers who are willing to buy your product. You have all the feasibility done. You have again, I'll talk about this in another slide, but we'll talk that. But you need to have all this stuff in place to then get it to a point where then the next stage is to get the investment capital. So then that's where you get a lot larger capital, and then you want to continue this process until you get much more capital into your projects or business. So this is how you source a bankable project, and I think and Wes will talk a lot more about this, but I'll just highlight on the very high level of it. So you want to have a viable business plan, right? So you want to hear clear value proposition, not just from the product and the business side, but also from the impact side, right? How is this going to be positively impactful in terms of are you going to have well-defined, measurable, verifiable impacts that can be measured, that impact investors will be looking for, and also will it be profitable, right? So in order to do this, though, you have to either yourself have to be the experienced project owner and knowing how to do this business, or you have to bring an external CEO or someone that knows how to run a business that can get this done. Will your project, is there, it's going to have to address market demand. Is there market demand for what you're building, the product or concept that you're coming up with? Will people actually buy this, right? It's one thing to have an idea in theory and something that looks good, in terms of the scientific aspects of it, but will people actually buy this, right? Whatever it is that you're producing. So you have to have that. But in order to get to that, to have that, the next stage, or what you really need is a proof of concept. A lot of times we like to work with things that aren't necessarily, investors like to work with things that have already kind of been proven. So you either have to have it, base it off something that has been done in the past somewhere else, or you have to develop your own proof of concept over time and using the grant capital to do this, and getting technical assistance funding and getting things going to where you can prove that it actually works, right? And typically you want to work with some kind of proven technology. I know some of this stuff in the WAITRO space that's being proposed and that were proposed back at Cape Town are new technologies. So a lot of times, though, investors want things that are proven. And if they're not proven and they haven't been used elsewhere, then you need to really show that this kind of thing will work, or else investors will they'll be a bit apprehensive to put their money to work in your project. But you also have to have the ability to secure commercial contracts, because at the end of the day, this is not just going to be a research-driven scientific project, but you're trying to make it into a business so you can then attract more capital. The whole basis, again, let me just emphasize again, is to move away from the grant-driven side, which it has limited upside. And once your project is and once the capital dries up, then your project dries up. So if you have a commercially viable project, you can not only attract larger capital, but it's also sustainable in the standpoint that it's viable and will continue to run, right? So you also have to have the key risks and constraints identified. You have to understand and make sure you're dealing with a legal, effective legal regulatory framework, wherever it is that you're planning to do this particular project, whether it's in a particular country, and how you're going to set this up. You also have the support from key partners, all your key stakeholders that are involved, whether it be governments, other academics, potential investment partners, NGOs, possibly all the people that are involved. You have to have that key support. Then you come up with a comprehensive business plan, and then estimated capital requirements. So how much you're going to need for grant capital to get this, project to a point where it's investment ready, whether it be $500,000 US or more, or a little bit less, or then how much do you actually need for the investment side of it? So you have to be thinking from, here it is at the early stage. This is what I'll need in the next couple of years to show that this will work. And then here's what I think I'm actually going to need in real capital requirements. Now, this stuff can change over time, but you have to have some kind of a ballpark figure. So pathways for a successful project, and again, I don't want to jump too much into what Wes will talk about, but this is just a high level overview of this. But you need to build on existing concepts, and if you don't have that, you need to show that your concept will work, and that's where you use and you get all the technical assistance and feasibility study work that's done to show that your technology will actually work and it is commercially viable or can be. You want to involve an experienced project sponsor or owner that's going to do this, someone who has the relevant technical experience, but also the execution experience, the business experience to know how to get these things off the ground, to know how to secure commercial contracts, to access local stakeholders, whether it be local governments, and then to access funding. And you may have to outsource for some of this stuff. And then you also want to ensure that your effective regulatory framework is in place, right? You want to have commitment of a local government that where you're going to do your project. And it may also involve creating an independent regulatory body that will work with you on this project. You also want to try to allocate the risk of your projects among different stakeholders, so who can influence and carry and share some of the risk. But very importantly, for a successful product, you have to have a form of some kind of blended mechanism or blended finance where you're using grants to get your project to a point to then where it's investment ready to then attract the private investment capital. And so with all this, on a very positive note, I want to just jump back from what I originally was talking about in terms of investments, in terms of capital flowing into this stuff. Now, we're saying we need more capital to go into this type of work. And the answer, the good thing is, and I touched on it, but the good thing about this is that there is money out there waiting. We just have to develop the projects to meet the requirements of that capital, right? So as you can see from here, investors not only consider sustainability to be vital, they're also willing to pay a slight premium for these investments. So they see the importance of sustainability in their investment decisions, and they're quite taking it very seriously. If you see from this is a survey that was done. They also the size, or there's a premium that they'll pay. I mean, obviously it's not going to be too much, but they are willing to pay a premium for projects and for businesses or investments that have an actual real impact on the planet. So what type of impact are we talking about? Here's just some sectors to take a look at. This is actually taken from the Dutch Fund for Climate Development, where I used to, before I started Seneca, I worked at WWF, which was, I managed the Asia Pacific region portion of the DFCD, which was really to do exactly what I'm talking about, to get grant capital and to develop projects at an earlier stage and then get them investment ready. So it was quite a unique and pioneering, and it's still around, and it's a very pioneering fund. But the sectors that they looked at, now under this, you can have multiple type of projects under this, but things that lower greenhouse gas emissions, for example. You have climate resilient land use and ecosystems where projects can fall under. You also have climate resilient water supply and sanitation, or climate resilient food security. So all these things under this, you can have multiple types of style of projects that would fit into this. But this is an example of the type of sectors that are attractive to investors that are seeking defined, measurable, and verifiable outcomes. So you need these type of sectors to work within. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, of course, but this is just to show you. And here's an example of the type of KPIs, or the key performance indicators, that funders are looking for impact criteria. Now, I'm not talking about the investment side. The investment side is separate. They're looking for key, performance indicators on the capital side, or on the profitability side, which Wes will talk about in more detail. But I'm just going to focus on the impact side on this from this standpoint. But for example, they're looking for things like 12 million people provided with fresh, from drinking water. They want to see and have that. Is that measurable? Is that verifiable? They want to see if there's 100 hectares of farmland sustainably managed, 100 hectares of forest and wetland sustainably managed. Also, for example, and again, this is from the DFCD as well as an example, but is there, can you mobilize capital to go into this? They want to see metrics. Can 500 million, in this case, private finance mobilize to go into these type of projects, right? Or 13.5 million total beneficiaries of your capital from what you're doing, and then 40 million tons of CO2 reduced in emissions. So this is on a big fund level, but your projects have to kind of align to these type of things. And will it fit into this? And if they fit into this, you have a, there's criteria that has to be met beyond the investment side on the impact side. If it fits into their impact criteria, then you have a chance at potentially working with a fund and getting funding from a particular impact investor. When you're defining your project, and again, I think Wes will touch on some of this, but you want to address, what is the problem that the project's trying to solve from an impact standpoint, right? It's impact, but it's also, yes, the business itself. But in this case, we're focusing on the impact. So what is the problem it's trying to address or solve? Is it, are you trying to solve for issues such as decreasing biodiversity in a river basin by treating the water before it's disposed in a water system to reduce pollution? From an investment side, does the project, for example, does it reduce costs? Reducing, for example, reducing the water needed in industrial process, which could potentially reduce water and energy costs for the industrial company or whatever process that you're trying to do. And also, what additional revenue opportunity does it bring? Is reducing the amount of pollution in the rivers, does that allow fisheries and, to expand their business, for example? So these are the type of things you want to have a value proposition for your thesis, right? What is it that you're trying to do with this? Just to let you know some of the profiles when you're trying to develop your projects and get actual funding. These are the type of investors that you're looking for, these are the type of investors that are in the ecosystem. Typically, you want to be focused on what is, I would say, the private philanthropic investors, public donors and grant capital, and also private impact investors and development financial institutions or DFIs. The ones in the bottom left typically won't be ready for your projects until many, many years down the road. Because as you can see from this chart, it looks at a risk tolerance versus impact versus expected returns. So from this standpoint, you can see that the private philanthropic investors or donors, they have a high risk tolerance. Their expected return is much lower, but they're looking for the impact. In the middle, you have the impact investors who can take a bit of a premium. They can take some risk, and they can take lower returns in exchange for impact. Then you have the standard traditional investors, whether it be hedge funds, whether it be private equity, whether it be long-only equity investors. These private investors are typically focused really on the returns. Their expectations of impact is low, their risk tolerance is low. So really, we're looking for the middle and the top right quadrant of the this investor profile. So this, there's a lot more to this. This is a very high-level presentation. Just to give you a kind of an idea of what's out there in terms of the investment world. Some projects that we've worked on, just to give you an idea, and what are we even talking about? So coffee, food waste, shade-grown coffee, and agricultural waste to energy. So if you look at the food waste, just to touch on these black soldier fly, an idea like this, for example, is basically taking, we've worked on this project with the Japanese government ourselves at my firm, implementing a project in Laos that essentially looks at, you take the food waste and you have the black soldier fly. They lay the eggs, the larvae feed on the food waste. Then you use the larvae as live animal feed, or you can use it in dried pellet form for animal feed. You can also use it as an insect oil enhancer for protein content, and also the compost that comes from the waste that comes from the actual larvae. You can use as compost and biofertilizer. And there's also proteins that you can extract for the cosmetic and pharmaceutical industry. So clearly, these are commercial value, and there's great examples around the world of how this is really working. There's some excellent examples in Vietnam, and how this is working at a very high level. A company in Vietnam just recently raised $30 million US, but they've been in business now for 7 years or so. But this is an actual business case for something that is still underutilized and could be done all around the world, especially with the amount of food waste that's out there. Now, the impact side from it is you have avoided greenhouse gas emissions because you're not putting this waste into the ground, so you're avoiding methane emissions. There's a direct, indirect jobs that are created from this. So you have improved income for livestock farmers through reduction in cost of animal feed. And there's a big food security angle to this, which is really important for impact investors. We're looking at a coffee laboratory. This is a little bit less bankable per se as our normal projects, but the idea behind this is it's a supply chain project. The idea is that there's coffee testing that needs to be done in places in Laos. Most major countries that or most countries that have a pretty big coffee industry have coffee testing and traceability. Laos doesn't have this. If this was actually there in Laos, that would improve significantly the whole supply chain of Lao coffee. So there's a big angle to, or there's a big impact angle to a coffee laboratory that's being done. Now, the project itself, like I said, is not super bankable, but if you look at it from a supply chain standpoint, a lot of coffee companies are interested in this because that will help improve their ability to source and sell Lao coffee. And agricultural waste to energy, that's really basically a project like this also in Laos, and we're also looking at other countries as well to do this, but it's essentially you're taking, in this case, rice paddy straw waste or husk, putting it through in the case that we've been looking at, an anaerobic digester for biogas and other related products. The rice straw that's left after the grain has been harvested is what you use for the actual waste and to produce the energy. So you get biogas for fuel, you get a biofertilizer, you get food grade CO2, and you can potentially get carbon credits from this as well. The impact is reduced greenhouse gas emissions, utilization of waste, forest preservation potentially as well, improvement of health because you're reducing pollution significantly, and you're also getting additional income for farmers as they have a saleable revenue from something that they didn't have before from the rice waste. Shade grown coffee is another really interesting one we're looking at in Laos, Cambodia, actually all over Laos. Basically, the idea behind this is you're taking what has historically been open grown coffee in open pastures, open fields, and you're growing it actually under a canopy of reforestation, right? So there's a big angle here for land resilience. But the idea is that instead of growing it in open fields, you're growing it under a forest. So we call it canopy covered coffee or shade grown coffee. There's, you have obviously your sources of revenue are the coffee beans, whether it's green or roasted that you're selling. You have you can also grow this within not just a monocropping, you can grow it within multi-crop. So you can have other products that are grown with the coffee as well. And because there's a reforestation angle, you can also derive carbon credits from this. Then, like I said, there's a land resilience angle here, and because there's a reduction on soil erosion. There's no toxic runoff as chemicals are not used. There's a carbon sequestration aspect from the reforestation as the natural carbon sink from the trees and the soil. You also have a reduced use of water from shade-grown coffee. So that's it. I just wanted to run that through quickly. I hope I didn't take up too much time. There's a lot to condense into here, but that's to kind of give you a understanding of a flavor of how we're trying to make projects from being, I guess you can say, grant-based projects, which are typically shown that yes, they work scientifically or work from a research standpoint, but they're not necessarily commercially viable. So just to give you an idea of how that works. And that's it. And of course, open for questions. I know I threw a lot out there. I'm trying to condense it into a short amount of time, but I think hopefully you'll get more from our other panelists today. Thanks.
Always remember to unmute before speaking. There we go. Thanks, Jean-Marc. I appreciate that. And I always love that quote of yours, is that there's money out there looking for projects. We've just got to bring the right kind of projects. So I think we're going to hold questions for the end, right? And we will forge on with our next plenary presenter, because who knows what questions the combination of these presentations will bring up. So I'm very happy to introduce James Devitt, friend of mine, currently head of corporate policy in the Research, Innovation and Knowledge Exchange at the University of Huddersfield in the UK. His job is to develop strategic policies, partnerships, and programs to increase the university's global reputation and impact. And in his career, James has developed and led a lot of strategic collaboration programs, including the development of Huddersfield University's International Collaboration Fund, which supports academics to develop projects with global impact and work with international partners. He's got a particular interest in data analytics and actively uses digital technologies in novel and innovative ways to engage with and support the university to achieve its goals. But in particular, James is a passionate advocate for the development of holistic and evidence-based decision-making methods for approaching research and innovation projects. He's also a keen advocate of systems-level thinking approaches to ensure outcomes are both fair and sustainable. In fact, he led a breakout group at the last WAITRO Summit in Cape Town in 2022, where everybody had a lot of fun and also learned a lot of useful things. Overall, he's got 3 decades of experience in economic development, so I'll waste no more time and hand over to James Devitt. The floor is yours for systems level thinking, James.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you as well to everyone for joining us today. This will just take a second or two for me to share my screen. Can you hear me?
Yep.
And hopefully you can see my screen.
Yep, but you're not in presentation mode yet.
It's coming.
Okay, now you got it.
Okay. Afternoon, everybody, and thanks very much to Jean-Marc for a really, really interesting presentation. Hopefully, I'm just going to build on some of what he's been saying, which I think is really fascinating stuff and hugely useful, with a few additional points really about how you can enhance innovation through systems thinking approaches, and this really builds on some work that we've been doing, which we've been doing for some time now. And obviously, Paul mentioned the workshop that happened last year, well, 2 years ago in Cape Town. But actually, this journey started further back, and really, you know, again, I have to thank WAITRO, because we had a fantastic session in Barcelona a few years ago, and I was struck by, you know, how well WAITRO could work together internationally, and that was brilliant. But what I was also struck by was there was a lot of solution pushing going on, particularly by developed countries and developed universities and so forth, and that was the impetus really for me to think about how we could look at systems thinking approaches to developing sustainable development projects. What is systems thinking? Well, systems thinking is a fancy word really, but at its core, really, systems thinking is an approach for problem solving that views problems as part of an overall system, and that systems thinking, a systems thinking approach takes a holistic view, an approach to understanding how you can use systems to influence one another. So you must kind of look at the wider system, both the as Jean-Marc was saying, you know, the economic, social, environmental, and cultural kind of aspects, but also you know, who's going to benefit, what are the relationships, what are the impacts. I'm struck by one of the things I always think about is that, you know, if worthwhile ventures were easy and simple, they would have been done by now. Real challenges and real opportunities are complicated. But by tackling complexity doesn't necessarily mean it has to be painful and difficult, and it's going to take a huge amount of time and effort. It just means that you need to follow a few guiding steps and put some more effort into thinking about how your project works within a bigger system. So I'm not advocating for huge amounts of mapping the world and everything in it, but I think it's very important that you do consider these aspects. So nothing is perfect, and but if you consider some of these things, I think your project will ultimately be more sustainable. And being more sustainable, of course, sustainability, it has many different meanings in English, and sustainability also means longevity. It means scale up. It means how will something survive? And so true sustainability are things that have a life of their own. They have a momentum. My argument would be that if you haven't addressed the complexities of the problem, then it's unlikely that you're going to have a sustainable project, and it's unlikely that you're going to get the investment that you require. So think about the core concepts, which are sort of interconnectedness of everything, the feedback loops that you need to require, ask questions of all the stakeholders that you can think about, and use a holistic method. So what's the difference between a systems thinking approach and a traditional approach? I work in the university, great, fantastic academics working on many projects, and I've had a lifetime of working with businesses undertaking projects, and quite often I would say there's a problem, this is the approach we'll take. It's a linear approach. It works to a degree, of course, and when it works well, it works very well, but it tends to be siloed in its activity, and it focuses on isolated components. A systems thinking approach, on the other hand, is non-linear and is integrated and has integrated thinking, and it focuses more on the relationships and interactions between the components. Why is that important? Well, that's important because if you really truly want something to sustain, particularly with a sustainable development project, which I would argue is the core to it, then you really do need to think about these ongoing relationships. Very important. The workshop that we gave in Cape Town, we came up with a challenge, really. We said at the core of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which we're all passionate about, and in particular SDG 17, is a paradox. And the paradox, as far as I can see, is that, at the heart of many traditional research and innovation partnerships that claim to have sustainable development outcomes, they are intrinsically unsustainable in design and execution. And actually, this was borne out in the workshop when we asked people to describe some of the examples of some of the bad practice that have particularly happened in places such as Africa, where people have been pushed technology solutions, and they were clearly inappropriate in the long term because they hadn't been thinking about the key attributes. So unequal relationships and badly conceived placing of individual interests are also a real problem. And I think, what we have to do is to think about understanding this as one of the big challenges for making really sustainable projects. You have to be thinking about a systems thinking approach. So what has systems thinking got to do with innovation? Jean-Marc talked about bankable projects and scale up, and importantly, and he also mentioned, of course, about the premium that investors will place on sustainable projects. I think he was implying sustainability in terms of the environmental sustainability, but I would argue that one of the key things that all investors look at is where's the impact, where's the demand, where are the risks, and what are the constraints, and that's what systems thinking, a good systems thinking approach will give you. So I would argue that a good systems thinking approach will give you a much greater bankable project. because it provides that comprehensive analysis, and it helps you understand things in the bigger picture. It helps you identify the leverage points, and it helps with the risk management. So the benefits of a systems thinking approach for investment potential is, yeah, as I said before, holistic evaluation. You know, the more robust and thorough proposal assessments are possible with a systems thinking approach. You are able to consider all the elements of the innovation ecosystem, not just one. The market demand, the technological feasibility, regulatory landscape, very much what Jean-Marc was saying before. These are very much part of a systems thinking approach. You know, who's going to maintain a system once it's been built? Who's going to, where are the skills in the locality, you know, that are going to make sure that this thing survives, this product, this business survives in its locality? These are the sort of attributes that quite often, I'm afraid, are sometimes overlooked, certainly in traditional methods. So, you know, another area is you get an enhanced viability. So you increase the likelihood of scalability, as I said before. Stakeholder alignment is really important. I think, you know, through communication, in a bit, I'm going to show you an example. Paul's already alluded to it, so you know, it would be wrong of me not to mention this one. But one of the things that's really important is discussion with the stakeholders, you know, because that's really important. And of course, it makes your proposition much more alignable to investment as well, of course, because you've got all the relevant stakeholders on site. It helps with ROI, return on investment, of course, as we said before, and also with risk management, as we said. You know, it gives confidence to the investors that it's got a well-rounded understanding of all the potential challenges and contingencies in a project. So here we go. I thought I would give you an example. It's an example that WAITRO were responsible for, a great success story where we're turning waste into energy, supporting communities in Africa. It's a wonderful relationship that we have with Kabadi University in Kenya, University of Huddersfield. This is John Allport, Professor John Allport, who's a specialist in sustainable energy systems. And this started really with a conversation with Joshua in Barcelona around how can we build really sustainable partnerships. And I'm very pleased to say that not only is this secured funding, but it's really starting to pay dividends, and most importantly for the farming communities in Kenya and the environment in Kenya, where it's really making a difference. There's a case study that's on the WAITRO website at the moment that you can read more about it. So I don't need to talk about that. But our relationship, the other benefit is our relationship with Kabadi has accelerated and moved into new areas where we're talking about collaborations across health and other aspects. So I would say take this approach, and other things will lead from it. So just in summary, a few steps that you can take. I'm very conscious that this sounds like quite a large operational task, and we talked about what the purpose of this workshop was and how the competition might go in November. And my view is this doesn't, at this stage, when you're doing your project proposals, it doesn't need to be a full-scale evaluation of a systems thinking approach, but you do, in my opinion, need to have given it some consideration. You need to have highlighted the stakeholders involved, the different parties and the different relationships, and think about its long-term sustainability. I mean, sustainability in terms of its maintenance and survival, I think, because there are, of course, aspects that a business will, an investor will want anyway. So, you know, my suggestion is you can, you know, identify as many components as you can, try and map the feedback loops and the dynamic interactions. How will one thing impact upon something else? Think about it both economically, socially, environmentally, and culturally, about where you're operating. Try and think of it in that holistic approach, with that holistic approach. Identify the key leveraging points. You know, where are the areas where you're going to get the most impact? And then finally, you know, have an integrated solution that addresses the entire system if you can. It's very difficult to do that at the early stages, but at least to have some idea about how that will look, I think I would argue for a really good presentation, that would be a really good step. Lastly, there are some products and tips and tools that you can use to help you. There's a systems thinking playbook, for example, that the German government produced, which has lots of interactive games and tools that you can use to understand it if you want to go down that far. There are various diagrams, causal loops and stock and flow diagrams and other things that you can use to try and visualize the ecosystems that you're trying to do. Try and develop scenario thinking. Think about what if this happens, what happens when this happens. Start thinking about some of the things that may happen, use them as scenarios, and then involve as many stakeholders as you can. So that really is the subject of my presentation. It is really for you to give some preliminary thought to a holistic way of thinking about a project, because that is the sustainable way of doing things. Thank you.
Thank you, James, for that presentation. Thank you very much. Duane Rand, I noticed we have one hand up in the audience from Dr. Bolla. It's been up for a little while. If he has a pertinent comment, I'm okay with opening their mic to make it, or if we just leave it to the end, that's also fine.
I can.
I didn't want to lose the comment.
I just turn on the mic. If Dr. Asuri has a question, you can ask now. Oh, Xucheng, you wanna?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay.
It's not really. I was just trying to, because it's a very good presentation that gives insights into development projects and can actually help researchers to get investment ready research work instead of doing a bench work that stay aloof. But what I'm trying to put on the chart is that it will be very good if you have the documents as a guide, so that we'll be able to keep tab on what we are learning to do. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for the comment. Did Xucheng have something?
No.
Oh, I just
No.
made the wrong click.
You're just playing with the button, right? Then
Yeah.
let's move on, because I don't want to delay our final talk, because it's by Mr. Wesley Okeke. And Wesley is a visionary leader and also the CEO of Headway Idea Labs in the US, and also the Cubio Innovation Hub in the US, which has a connection with JITRI here in China. Wesley grew up in West Africa, but eventually graduated with a degree in engineering from Boston, Massachusetts. He spent 2 decades in business development, marketing, and sales in both Boston and Silicon Valley in the US. And he's got extensive global experience across Asia, Europe, Canada, South America, and the USA. I think he's missing Antarctica, but apart from that, he's covered it all. He's got a lot of understanding of what it takes to develop new markets and support product development on a global scale. He founded Headway Labs following his time in the corporate world to emphasize a simple, clear process to transform ideas into successful launches, always with a focus on human-centered design and purpose. So he's done that for 11 years now, training startups with the support of hundreds of advisors, investors, and marketing professionals. He's refined the investor readiness process, the blueprint for a business to define its core value, purpose, and strategies, whilst being mindful of the economic realities of each startup journey. Wesley's committed to seeing businesses thrive by achieving investor readiness and then strategically positioning themselves within their industry. I've known Wes for a few years now, and I can tell you that a lot of us do this as a job. Wesley actually believes in what he's doing, so I'm very happy to have him present the answers to you here about how to achieve investor readiness. Wesley, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paul, and good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, everyone. Can you guys hear me okay? Good. Okay, good.
Yes, you're good. You're good.
Good. Yeah, my presentation is on another monitor, but thank you, James, and also thank you, Jean-Luc or Jean-Marc. Appreciate the two intros. They're very, very key. In not only the sustainability part, but then also growing and being strategic as a business. I mentioned this, I believe it was either earlier this year or late last year, that a lot of companies, especially when they're focused on making an impact, their mindset could be more of a charity than actually a business, and it's very crucial that some of these business components are very well understood, not only for the success of the business, but then also to attract investors, and as James alluded to ensure that it sustains itself after many, many years. So this journey to investor readiness is, excuse me, is very dear to me. The past 11 years, I've worked with hundreds of startups. I've done a lot of presentations, I've sat down one-on-one, but then also I've spent a lot of time researching companies and just following companies that have been successful from a purpose or holistic perspective, right? So these are businesses that put people over their process or their product. And by doing that, they have been very strong and competitive, and they have kept themselves alive and ahead of their competitors in a very unique way. But not only that, they attract investors, right? And so I'm going to talk a lot about that. I'm going to have to go through these slides quickly. Normally, it's a lot longer presentation than I'm going to be able to do today. But my mission, and as it says on here, is that we believe in developing ideas into purpose-driven products and companies. Do you guys see the menu here right in the middle of the slides, or no? Okay, maybe you don't.
No, it looks fine.
Okay, good. So hopefully you see this one. It says, "Don't be filtered out, become investor worthy." And Jean-Marc may have alluded to this early on. There are a ton of founders, there are a ton of businesses out there, but the investor criteria actually filters out those companies. And then you got at the bottom tons of hungry investors. So I meet hundreds of investors all the time, and the amount of investors out there that are looking to invest is huge. It's astronomical. So it's not that there are not many investors. The problem really is the companies that are looking for investors. There are certain things that they are lacking or not communicating. And I'm going to touch on the three key ones today, because there are several. And then at the end of the session, I do have I can provide the slides, but then also I have a PDF that I'll show you hopefully briefly that helps you look at where you are in regards to the investor's criteria. But this investor criteria is not magic. It's not always even extremely difficult as it appears. It's just a lot of founders in these businesses don't pay close attention to what these investors are looking for. So my job over the past several years is trying to close that gap, educate the founders and what they need to understand that an investor is looking for. And then on the other side is also educate the investors in certain cases, not all cases, but in certain cases, understanding the impact of a product that is going to make, or if it's a technology, to understand the type of technology and its strength or its leverage or its impact in the community and in the globe. Now, this is something interesting. Investors seek holistic measures of impact. So this may not, be common knowledge, but they do. And, about SDGs, they give a very clear focused set of goals to measure, right? They do. This helps us create a method to handle all the complicated details in a simpler way. And I got this information by looking at a lot of articles and a lot of documents regarding SDGs, and there's a gap between SDGs and how investors look at them and how investors look at startups and the terminology and so on and so forth. But the challenge is the UN, as Clarity.ai mentions, the UN SDGs have been written by policymakers and not by investors. Therefore, the goals, targets, and indicators are considered from a country and governmental standpoint rather than a company one, right? So there is some communication gaps there between the SDGs and what is communicated to these startups or these founders that are launching their businesses and what investors are looking for or expecting. And I'll provide some more of that information later on. But in order to solve this problem, I'm going to just simplify some of this. And this is 3 key things that investors are looking for. But just to preface it, that it's very important as a founder, and whether you're in the industry you're in now or in tech or in medical, because I work in the tech, I've worked in the medical, I've worked in a lot of different industries worldwide, the problem still remains the same, is not fully having the right mindset that the investors are looking for. And I'll touch on that. But realize an investor, from an investor perspective, there's a few things they're looking at. They are risking, and I need to say this because I say this every week to a founder or founders or a team, they're risking a ton of money. And it's not that easy for them to risk someone else's money for the sake of a great idea, a great product over nice people, right? You might be brilliant. You might have a great product. You might have an interesting business model. You might be able to change the world, but there's a few things that these investors are going to look at because it's their money and it's tons of money they're risking. And this is, unless something is done unethically, it's not as if they can take you to court. So they don't have much protection in risking this money. So don't think, wow, because I have this fantastic idea and I have all these years of study that I deserve to get this money. So there are a few things that they strategically look at that is very important. And so with all the founders that I talk to, I says you need to have a mindset change. And it's almost like a paradigm shift on how you view yourself, your product, your business model. But the 3 things that I will mention today is, 1 is the team, 2nd is the business model, and 3rd is the product solution. Very, very important. Those are the 3 things they look at in that order. You can have an okay product, you can have a fantastic business model, and you can have an A team. In other words, an incredible team, and your business can succeed. You can have an A product, you can have an okay business model, and you can have an A team, and the chances of your business succeeding is still high. You can have an A product. You can have an A fantastic business model. You can have a C team, and almost guaranteed your business is going to fail. And so when investors looking to invest in your company, the first thing they're looking at is the team, is you and your co-founders. And this is extremely critical to them, because whether the product could save the whole world and the business model is extremely well developed, if you as the founder and the leader of your business is not where you need to be, all these great things will end up failing. So prepping yourself, we call it in the investor world, we call it being very self-aware of who you are. And that means understanding your weaknesses, understanding your blind spots, which are things that you just don't see, and understanding your strengths. These are three critical things, and investors will work with you. But if a founder or founding team is not aware of these things, it's a no-go. And I've seen so many great companies get overlooked or rejected by investors, not by the product, not even by the business model, but by the team, because of the team. So there are some characteristics that I just like to highlight very quickly, and I call them the idea generator. But they're typically, these men and women are very focused, overly focused, heavy on impact, right? They're never satisfied with the status quo. They're a team player, but very critical. They are very self-aware. They understand their limitations. They understand they don't know what they don't know. And this is extremely difficult for a founder or founding team that has developed something brilliant, is they have a difficult time accepting that they don't know what they don't know. So throughout my presentation here, I'm really going to get down to the bottom line of things, right? This is not going to be a high-level presentation on all these great things you need to attain. I'm going to really get into the heart behind what these investors are looking at, but not only that, how you can be successful. And I tell companies all the time when I meet with them, whether they're looking for funding or not, something that I love on how investors critique a company is because the way they view it is for not only sustainability, but impact and longevity and strategy, right? So these are the key things. And whether you need the money or not, those things are extremely important for you to be successful. So it's not just about getting the money, it's about surviving as a business and making the impact that you've set out to make. And so there's very, very important that you learn these things just to be successful in your endeavor. These types of founders have these characteristics that are very, very important and critical. But again, the key one is they're typically very self-aware. So the first thing that we normally address that I have every founder do is what I call the unlock. And it's being self-aware of you and the values that you're going to provide, not only to your company, but to your customers, to your stakeholders. What is that value? And it has to be more than just a product and its features, because the values that you hold ends up being probably your core, what I call your core value proposition. There's going to be a ton of companies and competitors that will come out and they're going to try and duplicate what you're doing, and they're going to lead by price. They're going to lead by features. There's a slide I don't have on here that talks about 91% of customers will move to another company, not because of price and features, but because of this value that the founders have developed and express to their customers and their stakeholders and their employees. But a few things that are very critical in building this foundation, not only for your mindset and your self-awareness, but also ends up being your core value proposition, is the vision of the business, and this is long-term. impact. And there's an exercise that I always have people do, but it's long-term, being a visionary on how, in a perfect world, your product will solve a problem entirely. And I'll touch on that later. Secondly is the mission, the why behind what you're doing, not what you're going to accomplish, but why you're going to accomplish this. What is the heart reason of why you're going to do this? The next thing is the values behind this. What do I value as a company? 3 or 4 things, and these end up being your core values, but why? What do I value as a business and as a person? And these are going to be things that you value as a person or your team values, and they end up being your core values. And then the last but not least is the solution, right? What pain is this product going to solve? It has to solve something. And I'll touch on this later, but a lot of times companies will build a solution that addresses a symptom of a larger problem. Situations change, things change with that problem, and that symptom goes away and their whole business disappears. So really doing a deep dive, and I've learned this from investors, actually, when they look at companies, they tell me, Wes, this is a very good company and the people are great, the business model is awesome, but the solution, I see there's a hole here in their solution, and they're solving a symptom of a larger problem, and they haven't really dug in to see that problem a whole lot deeper and addressing that problem. But when a founder understands holistically their vision, their mission, and their values, and again, I can't go through this exercise right now, but when they understand those 3 things and they combine it with the product solution, it helps them create what I call a unique fingerprint. But not only that, it helps the company, it builds the company's core foundation. So all the decisions that the company will make moving forward are based on these 4 components. They can make a lot of pivots, they can make a lot of changes, but these 4 things are the guidelines and the guides and the boundaries and the foundation of that business. Plus, it provides a very unique competitive edge. And at the same time, it helps the founder and the founders be very self-aware of who they are, where their strengths, weaknesses, blind spots are, and then also where their strengths of value is outside of just a product and a feature. Now, this may make some sense. There's a whole lot deeper. There's much more to this than I'm able to dig into today. But I've sat down with tons of people, and as I mentioned, countless startups, and have spoken to thousands of people on this. And in the longer version, they actually get it. And somebody else mentioned value proposition. I believe that might have been James or Jean-Marc, but value proposition is very, very, very key. And this part actually helps the company, as I mentioned, create a very strong value proposition. Many entrepreneurs lose out due to never truly articulating a compelling value proposition. And that's true because we're very excited about what we're building. We see the impact potentially it could make, but we don't really narrow down and focus. What is that value that I'm actually bringing to the table? And when you nail that down, and when I first launched my business about 11 years ago, almost 12 years ago, this was very cloudy. I knew I was doing something good, but I didn't really know truly what is the value proposition that I was creating and providing. I didn't really want to think about it. I just really wanted to think about, hey, this is a fantastic thing I'm doing, and I know people need it. But what ends up happening when that's not clearly articulated is you have a very difficult time connecting it or aligning it with a cost or a price. And so you're expecting to make a certain amount of money, but you never do. You're expecting to make a certain amount of impact, but you don't. You're expecting to connect or resonate to a particular customer, but that doesn't happen. And so articulating that value proposition is very, very, very key. And it takes a great idea into a successful company. So the team, that was the first thing, the team, and then that team comes up with a value proposition that is articulated and clear. And then that goes into your business model. And I mentioned the mission, the vision, the solution, and the values, and this helps to develop your value proposition. But then you in creating a very strong business model, you've laid the foundation of who you are, your value, and then it helps you develop a value proposition. And then you go into what I call the explore stage, where you're learning who your early adopter is. An early adopter, every company on this planet, whether even when billion-dollar companies are launching new products, they find out who that early adopter is for this new product. And I could provide more information regarding what an early adopter is, but it is a champion that sees the problem and is as passionate as you are. They may not be solving the problem, but they're as passionate as you are in seeing this problem solved. And they will give you feedback, be an advisor, pretty much for free. And I'm an early adopter in certain industries and certain products. And I've sold tons of products without working for a company because people come to me and say, hey, Wes, this is the problem. What solution do you think will fit? That's what an early adopter does. But when someone is developing a new product or solution or service, they need to find out who their early adopter is. And that early adopter will provide the necessary feedback to ensure your success. And then you need to find out who your target audience is and know that target audience very, very well, very clearly. Write out a profile of who that target audience is, what demographics, what age, what background, all that information, and what economic status the majority of your target audience is going to be, so that you understand, yes, can they afford or can they not? What changes must I make? And then understanding your competition. And competition is good. When a company comes to me, especially if they're forming a new business or a new product, I always ask, who are your competitors? And they go, oh, we don't have any. And as they're talking to me, I'm typing on Google and I say, here's one. And they're like, oh. And I says, it's really good. Sometimes they feel, oh my gosh, you found a competitor. Oh my gosh, I should not start this. I go, no, you need to start this. Competition shows that there's a problem that needs to be solved. And as I mentioned in the beginning, understanding your value proposition helps you develop a unique fingerprint. And as Jean-Marc mentioned, you can improve on a lot of different products that are already out there, and you just bring your own specific type of value. But understanding who your target audience is and how they're going to relate, accept, adopt, or reject this value you're bringing and the solution you're bringing is very, very important. But knowing who they are is extremely necessary. And then the market size, how big is the market? Is it 50,000 people would buy this? Is it 10 million people that would buy this? What does the market size look like? And then taking a percentage of that. Most times I tell people to be very conservative and say, well, if I can take a percent, most people do about 10%, but I said, go down to a percent. If you could take a percentage of the market size, in other words, how many people in the community or demographics you could sell to that could afford it, how many people, a percentage of that, would that sustain your business? Would that help you grow your business? And could you sustain it? And then the last thing is just understanding the people, the tech trends that might be going on in industry trends, right? So people change, trends change, and technology, if you're using technology, that changes as well, and how people see it, view it, adopt it, like it, don't like it. Very, very, very important. I'll mention this towards the end regarding introducing certain types of technology to enhance, stabilize, set you apart as a product. And it's not that you're a tech company necessarily, but you're utilizing certain technology. It also helps the investors look at you a little bit closer, just because it can set you apart and provide other value. Another part of this business model is knowing the people, as I mentioned, and this has a lot to do with the early adopter. I'm not going to get into it now, but it's extremely, extremely critical. This is where companies, when launching, especially new businesses, when they're launching, if they don't know the early adopter, this is a matter of life and death of the success. And again, it actually could be a great team, could be a great business model and great product. But if they don't understand this component, they're going to have a very difficult time succeeding. And this is why this does need to be a part of their business model overall. Then having a global mindset. So this is Headway's our vision statement and what we envision. And I wrote a story out, as I mentioned in the beginning, understanding the vision. What does Wesley envision for Headway, right? And you need to know what that is for your own business. But we envision a world where entrepreneurs and innovators, through the eyes of their communities, develop technologies that address the core needs of the people in view of their culture, social, economic, and political ecosystems, right? So, and James kind of alluded to this, whenever you're developing a product, number one, you need to have a global mindset. These are the only types of businesses that I like to look at. Investors not always care, but the good strength and wisdom behind having a global mindset, you can go and go, okay, my product can solve problems in these parts of the world. And based on that, I've done my research that this demographics in this part of the world, my product or my service can solve their problem. But not only that, you're looking at those 4 components. Socially, it would be accepted, which is very important. Culturally, they will use it, right? Economically, they can afford it. And politically, whether political or governmental, it's allowed, right? And that could even do with simple things as importation, if you have to import something. One of our investor partners had come to us, they wanted us to develop a new product. He'd bought a ton of water equipment and shipped it to Brazil. And by the time he paid the import tax, because import tax from the US to Brazil is just astronomical and vice versa, he couldn't sell any of them. And so looking at those 4 components is very critical. But then not only that, when you're going to an investor and says, listen, I've had a global mindset on launching this product, and I've considered these 4 things, and strategically, which is going to be part of your business model, here's how we can be successful in these 4 or 5 countries or continents because I've looked at those 4 components. And it doesn't mean you're going to be able to sell to everyone, but you've done your due diligence. And now, from an investor perspective, and my peers mentioned this early on, the investors can see the scalability. They can see where this is going to continue growing and scale, and global impact is being made. Very, very important to put on that global mindset. And this is why I said in the beginning, this takes a mindset shift, a mind shift in the way you think. Product last is the last. It's very important, but it's last. It's last in attracting these investors. Secondly is the business model is second, right? And the most important is the team. But you need to think a whole lot differently when you're launching or building your product. And then comes the plan stage, which is where you plan out the development of the business, the team, and how what your product is going to look like. But realize you've done the first part, which is your team, your values, so to speak. The second part, you've looked at the market and it's helped you develop your business model. And the third part, now you should really start building your product. I always tell people, most of the companies that come to me have already started building, and they have neglected these first 2. And unfortunately, I'm not exaggerating, 95% of them, like, we got to go back because you're building something that's mistargeted. And we always go back. So this is where the product solution comes out. And know the pain. I mentioned that. Determine who feels the pain the most. Very important. Who feels this pain the most? Not just someone that says, yeah, I could use that. That would be a great idea. No. Investors call this product market fit, and you may hear the terminology. And what that means is who, when they hear about your product, says, oh no, I cannot live without that. And product market fits is when people are in such huge demand for your product that you can't keep up with the demand. And so understanding who needs it the most is most vital, because you're going to learn everything about that human being and what's going on in their life and why they need this product the most. In combination with the early adopter that also understands the problem from a different perspective is providing advice. You created this unique profile, and then you define your marketing strategy solely to target them first. And that the chart that I showed you that had to do with early adopter, which is back here, is the 13.5% of the people you're kind of targeting first. The 2.5, the 13.5, the 34% and the 34%, which is a large market, are who a lot of companies target first, and that's their first step of failure. And again, unfortunately, I can't get into this right now, but it's extremely important. And this early adopter methodology has been going on for over 40 years with countless people that have researched the methodology and validated that it's true. Again, so then you define a marketing strategy solely to target them. This is very important because it's going to help you develop the right product, solving the right problem and not a symptom of problem, the right people at the right time. And investors can pick up on this very, very quickly. I think this is where they get stuck at with a lot of companies, new companies, is when it comes to the product, this is where they get stuck up because they're like, it's nice, it does some good, but it needs to be reshifted so that it addresses a real problem for the right people. And then Jean-Marc had mentioned this. This is the business, the build development process. There's a feasibility study, and then you do your feasibility research, you do your proof of concept. If you're doing software, which I'm sure very few people are doing here, and then you do your beta. But I used to do this, and I'll tell you what I used to do when in the midst of, and I sold software and hardware for many, many years and other products. And I would do the feasibility study because I used to launch new products. And the last company I worked for was a $50 million company out of Denmark. And the previous one was out of Canada, and that was a $200 million company. And I was at the end of launching the product. So they bring the products to me. Okay, well, let's go find the market. And despite the size of both of these companies, they failed at this. But what I started doing is I started finding my beta customers and my early adopters early on so that I could get the feedback in between when the product was being developed and designed, specifically development stage, because they would get 3/4 done with the development of the product and then come to me and say, hey, go sell it. And I'm like, you should have brought you should have addressed these issues first. But what I would do is I'd find my early beta customers and realize these are the companies that were desperate for it. And on a few occasions, I had them pay for me to finish it according to their needs. I did not give them equity. This was locking in what they needed because I understood their pain and I was solving a major problem. And a few of the companies, they paid me $150,000 US dollars. They did not get any equity, but we finished the product according to their pain. We gave them a little bit of exclusivity, but realized that money helped us finish what we needed to finish. And we didn't really need the money to finish, but it did. It provided a commitment from a customer early on. But I did that at the right stage. And I had those conversations because it was critical to ensure I was building something that was going to be accepted. And this is very, very key for an investor, right? So when I'm presenting people to companies, to investors, this is something that the investors are looking at when it comes to the product. And a lot of times we're ready to launch this product and we have a few people in mind, but we have no commitments early on, and you really want to get a commitment early on. Now, innovation, if you can implement technology at some level, and I'll tell you why. And so some of I call these disruptive technologies: blockchain, big data, tracking, IoT, AR, LiDAR, AI. These types of technologies can be utilized in the products or services you're providing. But what the investors are always looking at, they're looking at, are there any other revenue streams that are a byproduct of what you're doing? They may not even relate to what you're doing specifically or addressing the impact because you have your main product or service that's addressing an impact, but it could be a byproduct of what you're doing, and it could be a secondary or third revenue stream. And I can't get into detail with that, but there's all the investors I talk to, they're always looking at that. They're looking at, okay, these guys, they've introduced some sort of technology, and this technology can provide another revenue stream based on how it is being utilized. Just a reminder, don't be filtered out, become investor ready. It's not as if the investors are not there. It's the founders and the startups do not meet the investor criteria. Here's a chart that I'll actually send to Paul for WAITRO, and this is myself and some investors put this together, and it's a chart on how they grade a company on if they're investor quality or not, and what provides the validity or the confidence that this company is investor worthy or investor ready. Headway has some investor readiness programs as well, which I'm not going to get into, but that's all I have. And thank you very much all for listening.
Well, thanks, Wes. That was a lot. I appreciate your time and for all the speakers. Do we have any questions for the audience if we want to open it up, if anybody wants to stick their hands up? Or while we're waiting, audiences tend to be shy about asking questions, I know, even in this sort of environment. So I'd also give a chance for any of the other speakers. Now that you've heard what the other people said, Wes had the advantage of going last, of course, but if any of the other speakers want to come back with a comment, that's also open. I see Beer has got a raised hand. Ran, can you open her up?
Yes, thank you, Paul. Thank you, everybody. Actually, this is very, very important and very informative. Very, you have led us to what we should do in our posters. They made us have a good and clear vision on what we should do, and not any project can we apply. Thank you, Wesley. Thank you, Jean-Marc Champagne, and thank you, James. You have done an extremely very important job to help us decide on what projects we can apply for this competition. Thank you. That's what I need to say. I have to appreciate what you have done, and thank you, Paul and Ran, for everything.
Okay, thanks for the comment, Abir. Going back, any of the other panelists want to sum up with a comment? Has your thinking changed by what you heard from the later presentations?
Maybe Paul, I can just add in. Sorry, a little bit frozen. Just among, I think you can see some common themes between us all. Like none of us had coordinated our presentations, right? But it's interesting to see that there's these common themes, which should then tell our audience members and who's going to develop the posters and put their products forward. That if there's three people who came at this from a completely independent, and brought our presentations together here, but we came at it independently, you can see that there's these common themes, and that just shows you that we need to, or you need to have these things, in line with, I guess what we're saying, because it's not really us that's saying it. We're kind of conveying the message from what is out there in the ecosystem that we're working within. And that's what we hear constantly, day in and day out. I just wanted to add that point.
Thanks, Jean-Marc. I certainly picked up a common theme. I think that the important thing to stand a chance of success here is the team. I think everybody in some way emphasized that the team is most important. And if you have an SDG impact poster and you're going to develop it shut inside a lab in one particular institution, I think your chance of success is quite low. But WAITRO, of course, exists to help you build that team. We don't want everybody working in their individual closed little spaces trying to make the best posters. We want you to reach out and find the parts that you don't necessarily have, and we will help you in that. WAITRO has its news website, for example. It has its newsletter with over 1,500 subscribers. It has, what was I going to say? It's social media channels. And if you have a project and you see a need that's not being fulfilled, you need a new piece to make that project whole, tell us about it at the Secretariat and we will help you. We will publicize it out on WAITRO's networks and we will help you find that partner you need, or even in some cases, the market you need, right? Because the whole reason for the title of the WAITRO Summit this year, Innovation to Impact, is that the way to connect those things together is that innovation is what we all work for in research, but the only way that innovation has any impact is if somebody buys it and uses it. And unless you can get a connection to the market, that won't happen. So through the WAITRO Global Network, you can connect not just to your own local market, but in fact to global markets all around the world. So I guess my final message, if you like, would be to please engage with us in this process. We want to get hopefully 50 or so really high quality posters into the WAITRO Summit in November in Nanjing. That's our goal. But that's up to you, and we will help you do it. It's not that you have to work on it on your own.
There is a question in the chat box.
Go ahead, Ran.
Sorry to interrupt, but there's a question in the chat
No,
box.
you didn't interrupt. Actually, I was finished. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if everyone can see. The question will be, are investors keen on startups in South Africa, considering the geopolitics and not stable energy power supply? Any of our guests want
I mean,
to?
I think I add into that. So I think I can't speak specifically for, I mean, the South Africa or sub-Saharan Africa, I think we're talking about, but I think just anywhere around the world, geopolitical situations will play into it. There's a slide I have, I didn't put it up just because I don't have we didn't have the time, but talks about risk. And one of them is, geopolitical risk, but also, on the ground risk with, there's expropriation risk. There's all kinds of risks that can come in. There's currency risk. There's several things that are of consequence for investors. So we have to, everything has to be taken into account, and that also will drive up the cost or the perceived risk of the project. So you have a risk premium also that will come into a project, which will then mean, it may not be as investable or as, lucrative for an investor, depending on where it's located. But then there's some point where the risk is so high. Let's take, for example, Myanmar in Southeast Asia, where we work. Most of our work is done in Asia, but we do global work, but mainly in Asia is our focus. But in Myanmar, I mean, we can't really do anything there at the moment because of the current situation with the government. It doesn't matter how good the potential investment is. It's just there's so many issues about getting your money out of there, the project being able to be completed, anything. So those will always be considerations, and that will be taken on a country by country and project by project basis. So Yeah, there's ways to mitigate these risks and help try to, reduce the risks, but it's difficult if it's, when it's geopolitical, you really have to assess it on a case by case basis in each country. But they're there, and they depending on the country where we're talking about. Yeah, so I'll just add that in.
I think you can never completely escape geopolitics, right? WAITRO, certainly since I've been involved with it, is very strongly focused on the fact that we are an association of research organizations. We're not an association of countries. I like to say in my keynotes very often that countries are very good at finding reasons to disagree with one another, which usually results in stalemate at the higher levels of the United Nations. But once you go to organizations, and this is really reflected in my experience since I've been involved in WAITRO, once you get into those organizations, you just find people who want to work together to solve problems. And that's where WAITRO really starts to focus. And the other thing I would pick out of your question is that you list something as a challenge or as a problem, an unstable energy power supply. But I'd turn that around and actually pitch that as a potential opportunity. If you can fix that, you've got an enormous commercial opportunity. But of course, you can never eliminate the geopolitical risk, and I'm not a politician. I'm a scientist, so I won't take it any further than that. If anybody wants to make any closing comments, they're welcome to do so. Otherwise, we're almost on the 2-hour point, which is about the time that we had for this. I don't see anybody with their hands up. So we will collect the slides together, and we will put those out at least to the participants. I have to talk to the presenters about how comfortable they are having them on a public website. But with that in mind, we will get you the information. The recording, the intention is to put it on the WAITRO YouTube channel, so you should be able to re-listen to this. And if your friends couldn't make it, or your potential partners couldn't make it, have them give it a listen. Have them join WAITRO. Have them come to the WAITRO Summit. That's also on the WAITRO website, although it has its own website at WAITROSummit2024.org. And please go and check out what we're putting together for the summit, register for it, and let's all get together in November. And so with that, I guess I would thank our presenters, Jean-Marc, as he's sometimes called, John Michel at other times, apparently, or John Michael, or even Jean-Luc sometimes. But mostly he's Jean-Marc.
Many names, yeah. John something.
Wesley, James, I know you're all very busy people, so the fact that you put 2 hours of your time into this, I'm enormously appreciative of. And also the Secretariat guys back at the China office, where it's now 11 p.m. and they're still there at their desks managing the webinar. Thank you guys for that. And we also have Dominic here from the Germany office. The Secretariat does still have a Germany office. It's just not at Fraunhofer anymore. And Dominic helped me with some of the concepts of this. So with that, I'll declare the meeting closed, and I hope to see many of you start working on posters for the SDG Impact Award in November. Thank you all for your time.
Thank
We'll be
you.
seeing you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.